Welcome to Enlightened, the enlightened journey of life. I am your host, Jen Hamilton, and it is an honor to have you here. I am a conscious life coach and women's empowerment mentor, and I activate a potent level of self and soul inquiry with my clients, which initiates deep and lasting transformation in all areas of their lives. I am here for the full human experience, authentically and audaciously sharing my magic with the world. On this podcast, we're all about mastering life on the way to enlightenment. And as we are here having a human experience, we might as well embrace it all. We play in the space of what is real and tangible, just as much as we play in the space of esoteric and metaphysical. You'll be ignited by deep conversation, whether through my own personal musings, interviews with incredible thought leaders around the world, and everyday divine humans sharing their soulful stories. Thank you for being on this journey. Let's dive in. Hello, beautiful soul. Just to let you know that listener discretion is advised for this episode and to be mindful if there are kids around, as it contains adult themes. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Enlightened podcast. I am your host, Jen Hamilton, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. Her name is Gemma Kelly. Gemma is a period coach and menstrual educator who helps women eliminate period pain, PMS, and ultimately live in sync with their cycles. After a lifetime of dealing with her own period problems, a rock bottom moment shook her into the realization no one is coming to help and birth control only makes things worse. She tried supplements, she read all the books, she hoped for miracles, but ultimately nothing changed until she took radical responsibility for her own health. It took her years, but she fixed her periods, and now she helps women do the same in months, not years. Gemma is an alumni of the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, the world's best health coaching school. She's been working with women for over 2 years now, helping them change their diet, lifestyle, and habits to better support their hormones. Whether you're dealing with period pain, PMS, or just looking for a better understanding of your menstrual cycle, Gemma is here to shine a light on the power of your periods. The conversation that you're about to hear between us goes super deep on all things periods, what it's like to be a woman, what it's like to experience pain, and how you can move through PMS symptoms, plus so much more. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hey there, it's your host, Jen. Before we start this episode, I have an apology to make. Unfortunately, we had some technical and software issues that we were unaware of at the time of recording, and the sound quality coming through my microphone is not great. However, I couldn't bring myself to re-record this particular conversation because it flowed so beautifully and it's not something that can be replicated. We have run the audio through a number of apps and programs to give it a bit better sound quality. However, I do ask that you keep listening as the guest has some incredible wisdom and magic to share on this episode. After all, human things happen, errors occur, it's life, and it's all perfect. So sit back and enjoy this episode. Welcome everybody to the Enlightenment podcast, and today I am so thrilled to have the beautiful Gemma Kelly joining us for a chat. She's from Infradian Life, and instead of me trying to explain what she does, I'm actually going to hand it over to her because the work that she does is absolutely incredible. And Gemma, it's such an honor to have you as part of the show, and I know that our listeners are actually going to get so much from you. So can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, what Infradian even means? Because I actually had to Google it myself, and a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, Jen, sure. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. So Infradian basically is the biological name given to our menstrual cycles. So I'm a period coach and I help women have pain-free, PMS-free periods. And so when I first learnt this word and what it actually meant, it blew my mind because we all know so well our circadian rhythm, our sleep-wake cycle, which is ruled by the hormones cortisol and melatonin. Basically, the whole world revolves around this circadian rhythm way of living, right? We all think about school and work, every day's the same. You get up, you work, you go home, you go to sleep. Every day's like rinse and repeat. So that's the circadian way of living. But for those of us lucky enough to have a menstrual cycle, we also have a second biological rhythm, which is our infradian rhythm. Now, it's a month-long rhythm that kind of follows the rhythm of the moon. So the circadian rhythm following the rhythm of the sun, light and dark, night and day, and the circadian rhythm following the phases of the moon, where there's, especially when it's like full moon, there's lots of energy being reflected off the moon from the sun onto the earth. That's when we can feel the most amount of energy. And for us in our menstrual cycles, that correlates to the feelings and the vibe of ovulation. And for those playing at home, you can actually sync your menstrual cycle to the moon as well.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I actually started tracking my own cycle, probably about 18 months ago now, after reading Code Red by Lisa Lister.
Yes.
She's amazing, isn't she?
There are so many books out there that speak to this, and it's an incredible world that opens up when you start to understand what your body is doing.
It's absolutely fascinating because especially when I was growing up, like there was a lot of shame around having a period, talking about it. Like you hide your pads and tampons if you have to go to the bathroom. You don't tell men about it. Like I remember I got my period, I think I was probably, should remember this, I think 12 actually, because I was in grade 7. And it just so happened to be that the day or the night that I got it, I had 2 aunties visiting. One was up from Melbourne and my mum was there as well. And I remember going to the bathroom and I'm like, oh my gosh. And it just was so perfect, the fact that I was surrounded by my mum and 2 aunties on such a special day for me. And I remember, obviously then my mum had to talk with me about, all the things that I needed to know. And the way my mum was brought up in a very sort of like strict Italian Catholic background is that, God gave you a period, it's given to you that you have pain as well. So we don't take Panadol, we don't take any painkillers. This is your responsibility. You don't take time off work or school. It's a very private thing. No one is to know about it. Like there's a lot of sort of deep-seated shame and stuff around it. And I remember it wasn't until I got to high school that I was staying at a friend's place and I got my period and I asked her mum if I could have some Panadol or some Nurofen. And she's like, look, I'll have to give your parents a call to double check. And my mum was at work at the time. And so she had to call my dad. And I said, look, please don't tell him that I've got my period. Can you say I've got a headache? And I remember she said on the phone, oh, she's got her period. And I was mortified. I just wanted the world to swallow me up because I'm like, no, please don't tell my dad. And my dad never had a problem with it. In fact, so much so we never spoke about it. It was like that. And there was so much that I ended up having to move through. And I guess as I got older and I started seeing things on social media where there was a lot of, like, people were talking about the period and really removing the stigma and the shame around it. And then, people sharing really intimate things about their cycle and about, their actual bleed themselves. And I think we've seen quite a movement, or in my view of the world, we've definitely seen a movement in how we relate to our periods and, removing the stigma and the shame about it. And, I know there's been quite a few, companies that, for, pads and tampons and now, period underwear, which is probably the biggest lifesaver I've ever heard of, really start to bring it to mainstream TV. And I remember the backlash, I'm not sure if it was like Liberal Carefree or one of those companies, like the backlash that was had, it was like, how dare you talk about this in the public, we don't want to see this, and just removing all of that. And I think, when we open that door and we allow ourselves to understand that it is the most natural thing for a woman, that we all go through it, that we all experience it, and it, we really have started to remove the stigma from it. I'd really love to hear about your journey working with women. And is there a common theme? Like, am I sort of like, a one-off that you've heard of, or is this a common theme that you work with women?
I think everyone has their own stories with shame. For sure, everyone relates to sticking pads and tampons, like obviously when you go to the toilet, even still at work. Like, I'll talk to women who still are doing this in their 20s and 30s. And it's like, nobody does that with toilet paper. Why are we doing it with tampons? It's crazy.
Do you know what's really funny? When I was, after I had my second child and I went back to work, I was in an office of I think there was about three of us, and one of them was a guy. And I would literally sit there and pump milk from my breast at my desk. And it didn't bother me, yet I could never walk out still with a tampon in my hand. It just was not going to happen. Isn't that interesting?
Isn't it? That's the shame that has, been passed down from generations. Like, the thing is, like, our menstrual cycles hold so much power, and for it to be taken away and for all this shame to be put on top of everything. Like, when we were growing up, like, they showed sanitary products on TV, right? But the blood was blue liquid. Like, it's just,
yes,
like, we've been so far removed from it. And even like girls in America, their tampons have like applicators. Like, they don't even touch themselves. Like,
yes,
we're so far removed from our bodies, our own cycles, and what happens. That it is one of the reasons why we have the pain, because we push through the pain. We don't talk about it. It's so interesting that you weren't allowed to take painkillers.
Yeah, that was a big one for me. Unless I was like on the bed dying, I could not at all.
Wow. So for me,
didn't even take the edge off it. Like, it was I remember one time a friend of mine at school had Naprogesic, and she gave me some, and the pain went away, and I was like, oh my God, like, you get to have this every month. Like, you are so lucky. I'm like, how do I like get this Naprogesic stuff? I was just, and then as I got a little bit older and I could, start accessing more of my own things, I also remember, there was this sort of stuff going around at school where it was, I think one of the girls, no, that's right, it came time to go to swimming. We had swimming, and I remember I wasn't allowed to use tampons. And I remember I was like, I'm going to miss out. Everyone's going to know. And I remember thinking to myself, because I was around someone who had a pretty full-on eating disorder, and I remember saying to them, I said, I'll just do what you do. I'll just starve myself and my periods will go away. Like that was the mentality. And that was like, this is like the early 2000s. Like, it wasn't like it was, so long ago, but that was the level of consciousness that we were essentially raised in.
100%. Oh my God. Crazy. My Naprogesic story is different. My very first period, my mum was like, here's the special painkillers, the blue ones, take them, you'll be fine. Your aunties had period pain, I had period pain, you're going to get it, just use these. And for me, they didn't really work. Like, I think I never took them early enough or whatever, for whatever reason, they didn't work. And so I ended up having ibuprofen all the time. And even sometimes that didn't work. And there's so much here, isn't there? There's shame. There is just our parents not being aware of the possibilities, like, of not being allowed to use a tampon. Like, there's so much here. And yes, things are changing. And the fact that I talk about this and so many people do, like, things are absolutely changing. And I think the next generations are going to be benefiting from this conversation here.
100%. And it needs to happen. It needs to happen for our daughters. Like, my daughter, who is 8, has already started asking me questions, and I'm having a very open conversation about her. And I think it was maybe last month I had a hot pack. I had my hot water bottle over my abdomen, and I said, I just don't feel well. And she said, what's wrong? And I started explaining to her in, the terms of an 8-year-old to understand. And she's so sweet. She's like, I told her, the look on her face was just like, oh my gosh. I said, look, this is going to be your experience when you get a little bit older as well. And she just looked at me and she's like, does Dave know? That's my partner. And I'm like, oh, darling, yes, of course Dave knows. And he is so supportive of it. Like, she was just so worried that, oh my gosh, does he know that this happens to you? And she was so caring. She's like, do you need anything? And she's such a sweetheart, and I want her to feel so empowered through her cycle and to understand it. And I think that's probably one of the biggest gifts I will be able to give my daughter. And I hope also, anyone that gets to listen to, this particular episode and this conversation that we're diving right into, because we're obviously going into so much magic here today. I'm so excited to ask you questions and hear so much more about this, because it's absolutely a conversation that we need to have, and especially for our generation that are bringing daughters through, because this is the change.
100%. This is why I started. This is why I do what I do, because I wish I could get in a time machine and go back to the younger version of me and say, you don't have to suffer through this. You don't have to hide it. It's all normal. It's all natural, and there's magic in it. And the more you fight against it, the harder it's going to be.
Yes, I love that. Can you tell us why your period problems are the key to your evolution?
Oh, yes. So like as a society, we are, like I said, running on the circadian rhythm. And basically as women, we push through when we have our pain, right? And when we're PMSing, we just brush it aside and we just say we're just PMSing when we're feeling anxious or irritable or moody. But the reasons why we're feeling anxious and irritable and moody in that PMS zone are real reasons. And if you're on the spiritual path, if you are wanting to be a better version of yourself, all you got to do is look at your shadows and look at the things that are like happening to you in your life. And the way through is like looking at what's going on and really taking stock in your life and asking yourself, am I living my life in authenticity? Am I being the person that I want to be? Am I showing up in the world as the person that I want to be? And if you're not, your PMS is going to tell you. For me, years before I got into all of this, I would have a breakdown. My partner would call it a breakdown every month, and I didn't even realize it was happening. And he would be like, after a while, he was like, is it time for a little breakdown? And I would be crying, and it was always the same thing. So for me, and for most people, it's always the same thing. So for me, it was I was working in a job that was not right for me. Great job, lovely people, but it was sucking the life out of me. It wasn't for me. And every month, like clockwork, I would cry about it. I would be angry. I would be feeling like my life was like completely pointless. And it was because my hormones were out of balance. My progesterone wasn't high enough, and progesterone is a really calming hormone. And it also is really good friends with another really calming feel-good hormone called GABA. And so these two should be beautiful and high in the 2 weeks or so before our periods. But because my hormones were imbalanced, they weren't. And so I was able to feel the anger and the irritability that was my truth. And looking at that and changing my life to be more authentic is how I no longer have those feelings, and I no longer have those monthly breakdowns.
Wow, I love that. That's incredible. And I've worked with so many of my coaching clients that have noticed that what I refer to as the inner autumn time, yes. Which is where I learned it through Code Red, through Lisa Lister, which is, I think it's like the 5 to 7 days before we bleed. And when we're having this shift of hormones, is that we can start to feel like we're spiraling down, that the world is against us, that, it's like, pass me a towel, I'm going to throw it in. It's like I'm ragey, I'm frustrated, I'm short-tempered, I'm short-fused, and I notice that occasionally within myself, I'm like, oh, okay, I can feel this building. It must be time, and I know that it's time soon because I know, where my days are. But I'm like, okay, my body's just getting ready to release what's no longer serving it. I love that you touched on hormones because obviously that's such a big part of our menstrual cycle. How do we know whether our hormones are out of balance, and what does that even mean if they're out of balance, and what do we do to create change for that?
So our hormones are constantly changing. So when I talk about hormones being out of balance, I'm specifically talking about that autumn phase, which is called the luteal phase. It's the last phase of our cycle. It's the longest phase of our cycle. And when our progesterone levels are not high enough, they can either be really low in comparison to where estrogen is. They should be higher than estrogen. They should be much higher than estrogen, but sometimes because of our diets, because of our lifestyles, because of our habits, and if we're not ovulating continuously, our progesterone levels don't get high enough to get above estrogen. And that's when all these symptoms start to happen. And so if you're experiencing any symptoms in the week or two before your period and or on your period, that's a sign that your hormones are imbalanced. So there are millions of PMS symptoms, and I have had them all. Everything from bloating to hormonal acne, so pimples coming up in the middle of your cycle or when you have your period, all the irritability, moodiness, anger, constipation, diarrhea. Honestly, anything that comes up around that time of the month can be related to imbalanced hormones. Now, you can do tests for this, but I work off symptoms. So I help people get rid of their symptoms. And yeah, it's through changing the food that we eat and supporting our bodies and changing our lifestyle and our habits. We can bring our hormones back into balance, which basically means that we don't have any of these PMS symptoms, any pain, none of that.
Wow, that's incredible. I have got some really close friends who have endometriosis and have exceptionally painful periods, like vomiting, unable to walk, unable to function for at least a couple of days. Can you tell us what's going on physically or physiologically with endometriosis, and is there a metaphysical aspect to it as well?
Okay, well, let's start with what's going on physically. So anything from endometriosis, even adenomyosis and PCOS, is a dis-ease. It means that the body has gone so far down the line of being out of balance that it has created lesions either outside the uterus or, in adenomyosis's case, in the uterus itself. And so the hormonal fluctuations that happen can worsen the symptoms. And so working with diet, lifestyle, and habits, you can really alleviate most of those symptoms, if not all. And I've worked with clients who have gotten rid of pretty much all of their symptoms just through simple changes. So that's the physical stuff. There's always, for endo and adeno, the physical lesions are there, and I'm sure there are metaphysical reasons for it. But yeah, you can definitely alleviate, minimize those symptoms just through small everyday changes. And then as for metaphysically, I think anyone who has period problems, it can be so many things, right? So many of our mothers, our grandmothers, their mothers, it's this curse of being a woman has really plagued us since the patriarchy took over a couple thousand years ago.
You're speaking my language.
And so, traditions have been lost. Now in the world that we live in, we push through our pain. We push through the signs and symptoms our body is trying to tell us to come back into alignment with ourselves. We live outside the paradigm of the Infradian rhythm. We generally live every day the same. But when you're living in sync with your cycle, you slow down. You can sync your whole life to your cycle. I sync my work life, my social life, my sex life. I sync everything to my cycle. And really what that means is allowing yourself time to rest in your winter phase. That's when you're bleeding, your menstrual phase. And then allowing yourself to have all the beautiful energy that you naturally have when you're ovulating, which, by the way, is the main event of your cycle. Without ovulation, it's not a real period. You've got to ovulate, and you need a whole lot of hormones to get to that point of ovulation, which is when the egg is catapulted out of your ovary and into the fallopian tube. It takes a lot of hormones for that to happen. So at that time of the month, in your summer phase, you have a lot of energy. It's a lot of creative energy. Your body wants you to get out into the world. Your brain is like wired for conversation and to meet new people and to do new things. And it's this amazing time. And then the seasons change and it goes into autumn, and it's time to slow down again. Autumn is a great time. The luteal phase is a great time to get everything done on your to-do list, but to come back to yourself. And then it's time to rest again. So it's really, I think the beautiful thing about relating, there's 4 phases of our cycle, and the beautiful thing about relating them to the seasons is that you can understand that the planet that we're on, it takes time to rest. And we, as cyclical, infradian beings, generally don't take time to rest. And so what happens in our environment when we don't let it rest, when we log all the forests, when we when the agricultural system just, pushes through all the crops and sprays everything, and like when we push the way that patriarchy, circadian rhythm living has been pushing, shit starts to hit the fan. The climate starts to change. Things go wrong. And so when we start to come back to ourselves, and when we honor the fact that we are different to more than half of the people on the planet, and when we actually rest, not only does it allow our bodies to rest and recover, but it can also give everyone else the permission to rest as well, and the permission to find a better way to do this thing called life. But the fact that we're so cut off from who we are cyclically has been really detrimental to our bodies and to the world at large.
Wow. Yes, absolutely. Like, I'm just, for those of you that are just listening and not watching the video, like, I'm just nodding like, yes, this is so true. And gosh, we just need to come back to nature, come back to our seasons. And I always say, I've never seen anyone outside of my garden like race out there in the autumn time saying, no, you cannot drop those leaves. And they've got the sticky tape out trying to stick them back on the tree going, no, get back on there.
I love that analogy.
Moving.
That's so good.
But why do we do that to ourselves? Why is it, especially in the Western culture, do we just feel this need to push? I mean, I think that's a whole separate conversation within itself. But we're completely disconnected from our bodies, from nature, from our natural cycles. And it's so important to come back into rhythm with that. And, if you can speak into the red tent theory that was around, like how long ago was that? And when did things start to shift away from the idea of the red tent?
Well, there's different, all over the world, there's been different versions of this. And I think it really was when Christianity started to take over and enforce this patriarchal system of belief, and then even more so, around witch trials when women weren't even allowed to gather together anymore. We've just lost all of that. So before electricity, before all of this world that we live in today, most of us would have been sunk up to the moon. And there would have been the medicine women, the women who take care of all the other women in the tribe, would have had their menstrual cycle sunk up to the new moon cycle. So they would ovulate on the new moon and bleed on the full moon. And that's so that they could take care of everyone else when everyone else was bleeding on the new moon, when the moon is dark and there's the least amount of energy being reflected off the sun. And then ovulate at the full moon when there's the most amount of energy. And so women gathering together at the times of their menstrual cycle, just having time, taking time for ourselves. It's been lost because of everything that's happened to the whole world. And there are so many people bringing it back, and there's so much magic in women coming together, talking about their shared experiences, helping each other understand their bodies.
Yes, it's so true. I've got a beautiful friend of mine who wants to start her own, red tent circle, and it's so beautiful because, oh gosh, we need this as women, and we need essentially other women to be our permission slip for this as well, to say, you know what, I do this, you can do this too, you are safe to do so, because we do need to look to other people, for that permission for a lot of things. I really want to speak into birth control. So people that are on birth control and obviously are not ovulating, how does that work with obviously hormones, long-term side effects of being on birth control, the different types of birth control, and then what impact that has on our cycles and long-term and even our reproductive organs? I'd love to hear your perspective of that.
Huge topic. Okay, so my hormonal birth control experience is actually what led me here. It was horrendous. I had the implant on, which is a little rod that goes in your arm. I had it in for 3 years. I bled constantly. I was tired all the time. I had points where I was numb to everything. I saw my partner. I knew intellectually that I loved him, but I felt nothing. It can have such a strong and different effect on everyone. There's so many different kinds of pills that have different effects on everyone. The Mirena IUD is a whole nother kettle of fish. Basically, all the different types of hormonal birth control all have their own ways that they work, side effects. And basically, when you're on hormonal birth control, the body believes that you're either pregnant or in menopause. It's kind of just confused. The pill specifically cuts off the communication between your brain and your ovaries, which is why you don't ovulate. And when you're on the pill, you actually don't have a real period, because without ovulation, it's not a real period. It's literally just a withdrawal bleed. So let's talk to the pill, because that's what most people know. When you're on the pill, your hormones are literally just flat. So I already talked about hormones always moving and changing, and talked about like the imbalances. But when you're on the pill, they're completely flatlined. And when you take your sugar pills, your hormones just drop and nothing happens. And that's why you get a period. And so the body is basically confused. And so for some people, I will say hormonal birth control can be a real saving grace when they have huge pain, PMS issues. But there's also a lot of bad stuff that goes on with hormonal birth control, the way that it can affect the brain, the way that it can make you feel, and the fact also that it doesn't actually fix any endocrine issues. It just stops your hormones from fluctuating, which is what they do normally. There are so many things that the pill changes. The pill changes the way that you smell. It changes your pheromones, and it changes the way you perceive other people. And so literally the people that you can be attracted to if you're on hormonal birth control are generally people who are more similar to you and have DNA that's more similar to you. So with women who come off the pill after being in a relationship on the pill for so long, attraction can change with partners. Things can change. It's not the way that it's dished out is that it just, like by doctors, it just seems like it's just what you do. You know, you just get on the pill and it's easy and there's nothing wrong with it, whatever. It's really serious stuff. And I know for my friends who've been on it for a long time, there were not conversations about the pluses and minuses of going on the pill. I mean, the pill, blood clotting issues, even just with the pill, are like 1,000 times more prevalent than, do you remember AstraZeneca vaccine? When it came out, it was like, well, no one under this age take it because of blood clots. Well, actually, the pill had so much higher chance for you having a blood clot and having really bad effects. And I've met people who have had strokes and who have had terrible things, and they're still dealing with side effects from taking the pill and other hormonal birth controls. So proceed with caution. If you choose to do that, you do you, but do your research. And there are non-hormonal birth control options that you can use to not get pregnant if you're using it to avoid pregnancy. And if you're using it to stop your pimples or to help with your endo, there are other ways. There are natural ways of dealing with these things.
Yes, I love it. I was put on the pill at age 14 because I was getting a few pimples, and I mean all the way up until the age of 28. And I love what you said about how you change, because the partner I was with, we ended up having children, and then it was, I mean, obviously, you know, you change as a person when you become a mother. And, you know, one of the biggest things that, you know, was, I guess, sort of towards the end of our relationship, he's like, you changed. It's like, well, of course I changed. I became a mother. But yeah, we were together for a couple of years, and I was like, I'm just going to take a break from the pill. And I didn't have a period. I was expecting maybe a little while for my hormones to balance out, because over the 14 years that I was on it, I probably had a couple of breaks from it when I was not sexually active, just to try and, you know, rebalance. But I would have a much heavier, painful period. And I was like, oh, no, better go on the pill. It's going to make it better. Not knowing any different. And when I came off the pill at 28, I remember I was at home one morning and I was like, I'm just so tired. I woke up one morning and I was exhausted and I was like, my boobs are so sore. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, I don't know, I can't gauge when my period would be due because I'd come off the pill. And so I did a pregnancy test and sure enough, I was pregnant, and a week later I was in emergency because it was ectopic, and so like the whirlwind that comes with that. And then I had one period after that, like once I'd had the surgery, I lost my right tube, fallopian tube, it exploded, and yeah, because that's where it started forming, and so I gone through the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual breakthrough of it all. And then I got a period on the next cycle and then felt pregnant with my daughter. So I hadn't really experienced a normal menstrual cycle for 14 years. And then obviously going through pregnancy, breastfeeding, it was like another year after that. So essentially I hadn't had a proper period for 15 years and gladly had never gone back on any sort of birth control. It was basically when I was at the hospital and given birth to my daughter, I'm pretty sure actually they gave me a script for the mini pill. I'm pretty sure they gave me a script here's all your pieces of paper to take away at the discharge, and by the way, here's your birth control. Don't let it happen again until you're ready, kind of thing. That's that's a whole different topic within itself as well. Mm-hmm. But it happens, it happens, and it's not until we have these conversations and share these messages and get it far and wide to really just bring awareness and expand in our consciousness about what our period actually means. Gemma, I really want to touch on the fact that shift workers, female shift workers that don't have a normal circadian rhythm, how does their infradian rhythm, how is it affected by shift work?
Great question. So you do need a really well-functioning circadian rhythm in order for your infradian rhythm to be functioning really well. And so it depends on the person. So I've worked with quite a few nurses and I found that some of them really do see the effects and some of them are actually okay. So I think it does depend on the person and whatever else is going on in life. But if you're doing shift work, you're probably like a nurse or you're doing hard labor, these are hard jobs, right? Hard on the body. So yes, it can absolutely affect your menstrual cycle. And, they probably can't do anything about it. This is their chosen career. So I would just say do everything you can to support your body in every other way. Get sunlight, especially when you can at the right times, early in the morning, and support your body with food. And I guess that's the other thing too with shift work. And that's kind of what I've helped quite a few nurses with, is to get off that fueling yourself with sugar in the middle of the night situation, which is only going to raise blood sugar levels. And when you're tired, your blood sugar is a little more sensitive anyway. So just doing all that you can, knowing that shift work is already going to disrupt a whole lot of things.
Yes, it's so true, isn't it? I've known a number of shift workers and, even clients that come through as well. And it's like, look, sometimes you can't avoid it if this is your chosen career, but be prepared for it to have these side effects, on your circadian rhythm, on your menstrual cycle. I know that you mentioned earlier on, there's ways in which you can, or that you specifically as a coach, support women to support themselves through diet and lifestyle. Can you speak into even some dietary things? Is there some things that the women listening can take away from this that they can start to implement that's just going to be an absolute gold nugget for them?
Yeah. So food-wise, your body wants you to be eating lots of different fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, beans, legumes, all the colors, because in order for your body to function optimally, it needs a whole bunch of minerals and vitamins so that everything can work. And in eating fruits and vegetables, you'll also be eating fiber. And we want that because we want you to be going to the bathroom to do number twos at least once a day. So eating heaps of fruits and veggies, nuts and seeds are going to be so good for your menstrual cycles. And the other thing I want to say is eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner is so important. And this is all to do with blood sugar balance. So coffee isn't breakfast, sorry. I've definitely been a coffee as breakfast kind of gal. And that is it's just a nuclear bomb for your hormones. So eating meals that keep you feeling full for 4 to 5 hours is really going to be the key to having beautifully balanced blood sugar, which is so important for our female sex hormones.
Yes, that's such a big one. Can you speak into, I'm not going to call it a fad because I know that there's science behind it and I know that there's for and against for it. Can you speak into the likes of the keto diet, intermittent fasting, long-term fasting? Because I was a faster and I have been told, yes, you got to do it, blah, blah, blah. Then I'm like, no, it'll ruin everything. And I'm like, there's too much information out there.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, there's different body types. There's certain people that thrive on it. There's certain people that find that they thrive on keto. Through my personal choices, I am vegan, but I, make sure that I try and get as much of the good nutrients and, all the vitamins, minerals, and all the bits and pieces that I need. But I'd love to hear, your perspective on these certain lifestyles and diets that people might hear about that think, oh, good, I can lose weight on this, or I can do this. What's your experience through this, Gemma?
Let's start with intermittent fasting. And if anyone's taking notes, get out a pen and paper and write this down. Most scientific studies are not done on menstruating women. Most scientific studies are done on postmenopausal women or men. That's it, full stop. And our biology is so different. And there is none, I haven't seen any evidence that intermittent fasting is good for people with a menstrual cycle. And in fact, the little science that's out there shows that it's not good for us, which is why I said breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Fasting is not good for us when we have a menstrual cycle because of blood sugar balance. And so just don't do it. Just don't do it. That's my opinion. Jump on PubMed. It's open. It's free for everyone to look at. It's so easy to see that none of these studies are done on women. So I know there's a lot of especially if you're into podcasts and you're listening to all the bros, they are all about intermittent fasting, and it does work really well for men. But it doesn't work for us. And if you've tried it, and I've tried it, believe me, I've tried it. It was terrible. And I've tried it beyond my coffee for breakfast situation, which I stopped doing. On my journey to figuring out how my body works, I tried it for a little while and I felt terrible. So if you don't believe me, try it and see how you feel. So that's intermittent fasting. Keto, all the other diets, fads, honestly, everybody's body is different. And I think there are good points and bad points to all fad diets. For me, it's all about understanding your own body. It's all about understanding how your body reacts to different things. And I think we give too much of our power away to other people. That's why I said, if you want to try intermittent fasting, try it. Because if you try things and you are curious about yourself, and by the way, your period's going to tell you what's going on, because if you're eating healthy and your period problems are still horrendous, your body doesn't like it. Your period is your report card for the whole month. If you've been eating in a way that your body doesn't like, you're going to have the symptoms. So being curious about your own body, understanding what the kinds of foods you need to eat to feel full for 4 to 5 hours is really important. And yes, micronutrient breakdown, so talking about fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, is really important. And experiment on yourself, because there's no one size fits all rule here. My partner is 6'7". I'm 5'3". We are different humans. And when we first started going out, I would be cooking dinner and I would eat the same plate as him. Why did I do that? I don't know. But I didn't feel good. And so when I finally realized that I was not feeling good, I changed. And It's really as simple as that. Like, start experimenting on yourself. Start being curious about your own body. And I think taking your own power back, which is really what I teach about the menstrual cycle, about living in sync with your cycle and understanding your body. It's taking your own power back. There's so much noise on the internet. And yes, it can be helpful, but it can also be overwhelming. So stay curious. That's what I have to say.
Oh, I love that so much. And yes, I have, I went through the, drink the exogenous ketones and don't do the keto diet, the fasting, the all sorts of things. And, the reason I landed on veganism and, as you would probably know, the difference between being a plant-based diet and a vegan diet is plant-based is generally just because you want to explore the diet side of things, but perhaps the health benefits. But the veganism for me, it's around the animals. And so I don't see animal products as food products anymore, but there was a time obviously that I did. And I personally thrive on that in myself. And I had to experiment. And you're so right. Like, you get to work intuitively with your own body, find the foods that work for you, find the times of the day that, like, the certain foods, like, who says that you have to have a certain type of meal to begin your day? Like, if you're, pouring out, the Special K or the, the high sugar things for breakfast, checking in with your body, is that really nourishing you and serving you? Are you, skipping meals because you think that that's going to support weight loss? Or, I love what you said, Gemma, about calling your power back and stepping into your own power, because there is a movement in the world for it right now, like, especially for women. It's this, it's through the rise of the divine feminine within all of us that it is, realizing that we are sovereign beings. And when we are connected to our body, when we're connected to our intuition, when we are connected to that divine feminine essence within us, we are, the best version of ourselves. We are unstoppable. I teach women how to unleash the goddess within. And, the whole idea is taking power back, creating those healthy boundaries, speaking into your desires and pleasures. And, it's so in alignment to do that with our bodies. If we start with our bodies, then we can pour out to every other area of our life, because how we are in small ways is how we are in all ways. And if we're giving our power away when it comes to our bodies, then where are we giving our power away in all other areas of our lives?
Yes, 1,000 times yes. I'm nodding here. How we are in small ways is how we are in all ways. I love that. I say how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yes, love it. Yes. Let's dive into, let's go to periods, right? Let's go to actual menstruating. Can you tell us what is the look, feel, time? What is a healthy period? I've experienced, heavy bleeding. I've experienced blood clots in my lifetime. I've experienced dark color, light color. Let's go there. Tell us all the things. Let's get down and dirty.
Well, let's talk about what a perfect period looks like. I'm doing little air quotes. Perfect period. Everybody's period is different. This is like a guideline. If you fall well out of it, then it could be a sign of hormonal imbalance. So let's talk about this. So a perfect, in inverted commas, period is a period that lasts between 3 and 7 days. Anything shorter is a sign that you really probably don't have enough estrogen happening and your endometrial lining isn't thick enough. And if you were trying to get pregnant, that's definitely something we will be looking at, trying to have more flow. And a heavy flow would be more than 7 days, and that would be a sign of a lot of estrogen and that your endometrial lining is just heavy and thick, which is good if you want to have a baby, but it can be too much. And big clots, big, obvious, painful to pass clots, they're not normal. Small clots, sure, but really big ones, we wouldn't want to be seeing that.
If you compare to the size of it, is it 50-cent piece?
Yeah.
And under is normal?
Yeah, about that. And again, sizes of humans are different. I'm a small human. My normal, would probably be, I don't really see clots, but for me, maybe a 20-cent coin. If you are a larger, taller human, then maybe a 50-cent coin. And also use your intuition to feel into it as well. If it feels big and it was painful, then yeah, that's not normal. And so in that time of your period, if you have a whole bunch of pain, it's not normal. sure, it can be normal to feel like there is an extracurricular activity going on when you have your period. Your uterus is having little tiny cramps, which is allowing the uterine lining to break free and to move through your cervix and then through the vaginal canal out into the world. And so, yeah, if you're having a whole lot of pain, that's a sign that there's a whole bunch of these little guys called prostaglandins. They're hormone-like little guys that are the things that make you cramp and make that the movement of the uterus happen so that the blood and the uterine lining can shed. So heaps of pain, not normal. You can definitely do something about it. So 3 to 7 days. A heavy flow would be more than 60 mils. Now you're thinking, what's 60 mils? I use a cup because I'm a period nerd. And so I actually use a cup and I'll pour it out into a measuring cup so I can see what's going on because I'm a hella nerd. And for me, when I came off hormonal birth control, my periods were so light. They were under 10 mils, which is basically like if I wanted to get pregnant, it wouldn't have happened because I didn't have enough uterine lining. And so, yeah, anywhere between maybe like 30 and 60 mils is pretty much normal. But again, if you're a tiny human or if you're a large human, you can be a little bit in or out of those numbers. And the color, we want to be cherry red, really like blood, like beautiful, rich blood color. If you are seeing like brown, just like a little bit with what we call spotting before full flow, a little bit of blood, yep, we call that spotting. A little bit can be normal. If it's like 10 days of spotting, that's a sign that our progesterone levels are too low, and you'd probably also be experiencing other annoying symptoms like sore boobs, like bloating. So spotting before is a sign of hormonal imbalance. Spotting after can be normal, but we don't want it to go on for too long. So yeah, cherry red is what we're looking for. It can be a bit darker. And anything in any other color range, if you ever see green or gray, that is a sign of infection. Go to your doctor. Oh, and while we're here, I guess, let's talk about cervical fluid. Some people call it discharge. I don't like to call it discharge because it makes it sound completely pointless. Cervical fluid is very full of purpose. It's a brilliant sign of fertility. It's a brilliant sign that your hormones are working beautifully. And you should see it for about 5 days before ovulation. And this is a sign from your body that you are fertile. Because, by the way, you can actually only get pregnant for about 5 or 6 days in your whole cycle. I'll let that one land. You can only get pregnant for 5 or 6 days in your cycle. And so the job of the cervical fluid is to keep the sperm alive in your uterus while they wait for your egg to be ovulated. And then the egg itself only lives for about 12 to 24 hours. So it's a pretty small window for pregnancy. And yet we're all on hormonal birth control that really screws with us all month long. So
I know there is so much myth and just misinformation out there, isn't there? And if we just understood that, cervical fluid, I've always heard it as discharge. I always
I know.
Discharge. Oh, and it just sounds, yeah. It's one of those funky words, isn't it?
Sounds like moist. Oh,
moist.
Come on, guys.
Moist
cervical fluid is a beautiful thing. It's a sign that your body is working really, really well. You want to see it.
Let's go there then, because let's talk about what is normal for cervical fluid. Let's talk about smell, colour, amount, anything that you want to share, because there is normal and then there's abnormal as well, because obviously like there can be infection, there can be other things that play. How do you know the difference of what happens if you're having cervical fluid leaving your body outside of that, pre-ovulation window? Let's go there.
Great question. Okay, so cervical fluid. So basically after you have your period, you'll most likely experience a couple of dry days. If your cycle is really short, you might go straight to seeing cervical fluid, which can be watery, it can be sticky, it can be like a little bit creamy. That's also normal. And then the most fertile quality cervical fluid is literally if you wipe with toilet paper or if you get it on your fingers, you could pull it apart and it would look like egg whites. And that is really good quality cervical fluid. So that would be like clearish substance. So at this point, if you're seeing anything with a bit of a gray tinge, a bit of a green tinge, that's a sign of infection. If you're seeing it with a bit of a pinky tinge, that's probably a sign that there's a bit of blood in it, which can be normal around ovulation. So just keep an eye on that, see how that goes for you. If you feel worried, listen to your intuition, go and see your doctor. So that will happen. The cervical fluid will happen about 5 days before you ovulate. And then after ovulation, ideally, you would be dry from after ovulation all the way up until you bleed again, which is the autumn phase, the luteal phase. Now, if you're seeing cervical fluid at this time in the 1 to 2 weeks before your period, it's actually a sign that your progesterone levels are not getting higher than estrogen, because estrogen is actually what creates. Estrogen sends the message to your cervix to say, let's make some cervical fluid. And if it's happening in that second half of your cycle, it's because estrogen is higher than progesterone. And so your body is kind of confused. And it's like, what are we doing here? Are we ovulating? What's going on? I'm hearing a lot of estrogens. And the cervix is like, okay, let's do it again. So you ideally don't want to be seeing cervical fluid in the time between the middle of your cycle, ovulation, when you have the most amount of energy, and when you bleed again. Now, it's not bad, but it's just a sign and that your hormones are a little bit imbalanced. And by the way, if you're seeing this, you will most likely be seeing all the other crappy signs of PMS as well. Bloating, pimples, irritability, the whole shebang.
Right. That's really, really interesting. Progesterone's been mentioned a lot, and, progesterone sounds like it plays such a massive part in, ovulation, bleeding, all of that. How can we increase our progesterone?
So progesterone is really cool. It's made a little bit in our adrenal glands. And we haven't touched on stress, but stress is like a huge reason why our menstrual cycles go haywire. So there's a little bit produced in our adrenal glands. And so in the first half of our cycle, there's just a little bit of progesterone in the body from the adrenal glands. And then when we ovulate, what actually happens is you can kind of think of it like an eggshell. So the egg is created and it's catapulted out of our ovary into the fallopian tube. And the shell that's left over inside our ovary, it actually turns into a temporary gland. And it's called the corpus luteum. And this gland can get pretty big. It can get to I think a centimeter, it's big. And it's this gland that pumps out progesterone. And the progesterone is there to keep the uterine lining intact. So the first half of our cycle, estrogen is rising, and this is when our uterine lining is being built. This is when it gets to a point and we start seeing cervical fluid. And then after ovulation, the corpus luteum, that temporary gland inside your ovaries, takes over the job of being the main hormone. And it holds that uterine lining in place. Now, it's going to hold it there until either it gets a signal from a fertilized egg that says, hey, I'm here, let's go for pregnancy, go, 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 go. And that corpus luteum will stay pumping out progesterone until the placenta takes over at about 12 weeks. So that's why people don't do it so much anymore, but you would keep your pregnancy quiet until you get to 12 weeks, because that's when the placenta takes over, and that's when it's more of a sure thing that this pregnancy is viable. And so if there's no sign from a fertilized egg that a pregnancy has occurred, then the corpus luteum just dissolves back into the ovary, and then the uterus gets the sign that there's less progesterone, and when all your hormones go down, 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 that's when you bleed again, and that's the start of a new cycle.
Wow. Sorry, keep going.
So in order for us to have good progesterone levels, we need to ovulate, which brings me back to ovulation is the main event of your cycle. And we need to have a lot of support from estrogen. And then there's two other hormones that come from our brain, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And also actually testosterone. You get a little boost of testosterone right in the middle of the cycle as well, which is why you're feeling frisky in the middle of your cycle. And so it's those four hormones, 4 out of 5 of your main female sex hormones, that are really, really high. And this is what makes ovulation happen. Now, in order to make ovulation happen, we need to be chill. We need to really not let life stress us out, because when life stresses us out, when our blood sugar is imbalanced, that's when these two other hormones, cortisol, your stress hormone, and insulin, the hormone related to blood sugar regulation, these two hormones take a lot of energy. And when those two hormones are being used too much in our bodies, there's other hormones that can't be made because they're basically taking all the nutrients and all the goodness to be made and distributed around your body. So we want to be chill as much as possible. And we want to be eating a rainbow of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds so that our body has enough nutrients to support a growing egg and all of that hormonal support it takes for us to actually get the egg out of the ovary and into the fallopian tube.
Wow. I feel like I've just learned so many new things there. That was incredible. Let's touch on the number of days that in a cycle that's, I guess, normal. But yeah, sort of the average number of days that we want to be seeing for a cycle.
So same theory applies here about being, it's your normal. Find your normal. So we'd want to be having a cycle between 25 and 35 days. So our cycle starts on day one being the first day that we bleed. And that's full flow, not spotting, not little bits of spotting, but full flow. That's day one. So a 25-day cycle, it is on the shorter side. It basically just means like your body hasn't had a lot of time to build up that estrogen, to build the uterine lining. And so anything shorter than 25 days, we would be looking at, like, you probably just, look, there's so many things that could be happening, but it could be things like eating more food. That's going to be really helpful for you. And then anything more than 35 days can be a sign of so many things. But basically, your body, like I talked about, it takes a lot of hormonal support to ovulate. And if you are stressed, potentially your body is going to try to ovulate multiple times throughout your cycle, which is why cycles can be longer than 35 days. And then actually there's one more thing that I want to insert here. The second half of your cycle, between after you ovulate and when you have your bleed, this is the luteal phase, that autumn phase. This is basically set in stone for every single person. Everyone basically has the same number of days of the luteal phase. For me, it's 12. Normal would be about, 12 to 14-ish. Everyone has the same number of days in the luteal phase. It's the first half of the cycle that is variable. And that is due to stress and all things going on in our lives. And that's because your body is trying to ovulate, and it's going to depend on how long it takes your body to ovulate. So for a lot of people who have irregular cycles, this is probably the main reason why. It's that your body is trying to ovulate and either doing it really easily some months or finding it really difficult other months.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's amazing. I just want to touch, before we wrap up, Gemma, I want to touch on the actual blood itself when we bleed. I have seen women pour it onto plants. I have seen people do facials with it. Can you tell us about the nutrient content? What it's like? Do we just wash it down the sink if it's on period undies, or put it in the bin if it's on a pad or a tampon? Like, tell us what the actual blood can be used for, if there's anything in particular.
So I already told you that I'm a nerd and I measure mine. So I put it in a jar with some water and I put it on my plants as fertilizer. Our blood it's magical. It's full of, like, it's the bed that an embryo is going to embed itself in and grow new life. It has to be full of goodness, of nutrients, of stem cells. It's full of goodness. So yes, I haven't yet. I think I should. I know some people who do, who put it on their faces. Because it's full of stem cells. It's full of goodness. So, if you've got period undies, you can literally wring it out into a bucket, with no other soap or anything, just with water, and put it on your garden. If you use a cup, definitely dilute it with water because it's quite strong, and put it on your garden. And then as for pads and tampons, I want to encourage you to try something that is more sustainable. And I know for some people it's really not a thing because they just don't like how it feels, or like, I get it. But if you're open to it, try reusable undies, a reusable pad. There's even beyond cups, there's another thing called a disc. It's really cool. It's just a different shape. Experiment with these things because pads and tampons, especially like the plastic on the back of pads, like plastic takes thousands of years to break down, and therefore every pad that has ever been used is pretty much still intact on the planet right now. Just crazy to think about. So yeah, I encourage you to find reusable options if you feel comfortable. And there are also some cool companies who are doing like more, like definitely choose organic pads and tampons as well, because any pesticides sprayed on cotton, any other, like they'll bleach the cotton for pads and tampons to make it whiter. And if you're putting that up into your vaginal canal, it's such a sensitive part of the body. It's not great for the vaginal microbiome. And so it's not going to be conducive to you having a fabulous period. So there's plenty of options out there now. You do you, find what works for you, and choose organic where possible.
Yes, I love it. I love it. I love it. Period sex.
Oh yeah.
For, against, make it fun. Tell me about that.
You do you. I'm for. So cyclically speaking, our libido is highest at in the middle of our cycle when we are ovulating, and for a lot of people, your libido will be at the lowest when you have your period. So there's that to take into account. So maybe a little bit more foreplay is going to be helpful. And then the other thing to think about is that blood is mostly water. So the lubrication is going to be different. So beyond like the mess that can be made, it's just think about maybe some extra lubrication with coconut oil. Just make sure you're feeling comfortable, or a lot more foreplay is also helpful. But yeah, do it. It's also like an orgasm's going to release a lot of endorphins, which is going to make you feel really good, especially if you are cramping. So take it slow and enjoy yourself.
I love it. Is there any tips that you can give to women about how to bring the topic up with their partner to say that, it's not gross? Like, I really want to try and have period sex. How do you feel about that? Like, is there any advice that you can give to women that might have not had explored this side of things with their partner?
Wow. So, yeah, conversations just to start with. Like, if your partner is thinking that it's gross, like it's going to take a little while to change their minds or to acclimate them and become comfortable with it. So not only would I talk about period sex, but I would be talking about my period in general. I had a heavy flow, I had a light flow, like all the things. Just open up conversations at any point that you can, just to normalize periods. And yeah, I think that's what it is. It's normalizing it, like even just beyond sex, just having literal general conversations around the dinner table about what's going on with your body. And also, if you are at all grossed out about it, like it's going to be really hard to come to the conversation from a really grounded, excited place. So if you need to be doing some work on this, if you need to release some of that shame, if you need to get a little bit more in touch with you, I would start with you so that you can come to the conversation from a really like grounded, excited place. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. If there's anyone that's listening that's, they've used a tampon applicator, they're not in touch with their bodies, they don't even know how long their cycle is, they resent having their period, they felt shame around it, where is even best to start to connect with it? What advice would you give there?
Oh, wow. Honestly, I would actually start really simply with resting in your menstrual phase, because that's probably going to bring up a lot. Like for so many people, we feel like we have to keep going. We have to push. But I would say starting by being gentle with yourself. And if you have pain, being with that pain, listening to it, breathing through it, and letting it flow through you, because it will pass. And it might come in waves, but it will always leave again. So just listening to that, being comfortable with the fact that you can't perform at 100% if you are in this pain zone. For me, I've been on this journey for a long time. And so now when my period comes, like, I do rest a little bit, but I got energy, you know? So there will be a time where you can do anything at any point. But if your body is in pain, it's inviting you to stop and listen to it. And so I would start there. Yeah. Listen to your own body.
I love that so much. And even what I would say to that is perhaps create a journaling practice, asking yourself the question, what are my beliefs around my period? What stigma have I been brought up with?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that I'm afraid of or that I don't understand, and I can gain some more clarity or, research, or even, book in a session with you, which we'll touch on in a second about how you do support women through this. But just really sitting with those questions and going inwards and asking yourself and just creating a bit of awareness around why it is that you perhaps have felt disconnected, or maybe this is the first time you've heard two women speak so openly about periods and all of the questions. And it's like, oh my God, how is this out there? And surprise, this is what we do. So I think it's definitely, absolutely honoring your period, honoring your pain, honoring the fact that you are a cyclical being, and, honoring it and accepting it as well. If you're fighting it and battling with it and, being annoyed, oh, I've got my period again, I can't do this, I can't do that, or, it's disappointing or whatever, check in with the relationship that you have around your cycle and, menstruating in general. And, start there. Just do the inwards journey. And then, if you need more information, I'll, in the show notes, I'll refer to Gemma's website, infradianlife.com. There's, plenty of information that she shares on social media as well, which I'll have the link to her Instagram in the show notes. And talk to women, talk to mums, sisters, girlfriends, and talk to males about it as well. Let's create that conversation. I'm so open about my period with my partner, and he's so open to receiving all the information. And, at the start of our relationship, when I was starting to talk about it, and this is when I was starting to first learn about my cycle and what it all meant and how to track it and how I want to be feeling through it. At first, I felt a little bit of discomfort bringing it forward, but I knew if I wanted to spend my life with this man that, all parts of me are welcome, as is, all parts of him are welcome. And this is, a part of me. There's nothing that is shameful. There's nothing that I need to hide from him. And, at times I might need a little bit more privacy or a little bit more of my alone time when I want to go inwards through that, that winter phase of the general hibernation time that we experience. And, he absolutely honors where I'm at in my cycle. He's so supportive of me. He's the one that's, doing the housework, all the extra bits and pieces, when I need to rest, especially through those first couple of days of my period, and, being extra gentle and, extra head rubs and back rubs, extra, cuppers and whatever I need, he's just there. And it's such a beautiful part of our relationship that, he absolutely understands and honors my cycle. And I think it's such a beautiful thing, that men are able to meet us right there.
I love that. He sounds magical.
He really is. He is an incredible soul. Gemma, before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners? Any further wisdom that you would like to impart on them?
Oh, I think we've covered so much. Beautiful questions. Thank you, Jen. I just want to encourage the women out there to get to know their cycles, whether that's using an app or a journal, especially starting to uncover this infradian rhythm and how it affects your body. So the easiest thing I love to tell people is to write down the energy levels that they're feeling on a day and do this for 3 months, whether it's high energy, low energy, or medium energy. Just write it down. And then I would also write 3 emotional words that describe your day. And when you do this for 3 months and then you go back and you have a look, you'll start to see some patterns emerge. And this is where we can start to really understand how our body is reflecting this cyclical infradian pattern. It's something that is happening with us. It's something that's happening for us, and it's so magical. And when we start to tune into it instead of fighting against it, life can get so much easier.
Yes, I love it. I love it. I love it. How can women work with you? What is it that you offer? And tell us a bit about your coaching, your programs. I no doubt there's so many women that'll be like, oh my gosh, give me a little slice of Gemma.
Yes. So I work one-on-one with women, and I also work in groups. So I have a program. It's called Infradian Life Academy, and it takes women step by step through all the diet, lifestyle, and habit changes they can make to free themselves from period pain and PMS and to start to live in sync with their cycle. And I'm actually launching a membership in January on the 18th. So whether you're listening to this before or after, that's a way that you can work with me on an ongoing basis. We will have fortnightly kind of on Zoom red tents. I call them coaching circles. And then, there's time to learn the masculine of do this, do this, do this, try this, do that. And then also the feminine, which is the coaching circles. And we talk about how we can integrate all this masculine stuff into our lives and really flow with our bodies. So you can find me on Instagram at Infradian Life, which is INFRADIAN life. And my website's the same, infradianlife.com.
Amazing. And obviously we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Gemma, you have been an absolute gem. Thank you so much for all of your incredible information and wisdom that you have shared on the show today. Everybody go and follow Gemma and listen to your menstrual cycle, connect with it, honor it, and enjoy being a woman. Thank you so much for joining me, Gemma. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you love the Enlightened podcast, and the biggest compliment you can give me is subscribing to this podcast, sharing it, and leaving a rating and review. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. My handle is @JenHamiltonOfficial, and the podcast handle is enlightened_podcast. You can also find the video version on YouTube on my channel. Just search Enlightened, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a beautiful day and enjoy living the enlightened journey of life.